If you're watching After the Sirens, you're already the kind of person who understands that World War II wasn't just won with firepower, but with knowledge that kept soldiers alive when everything else failed. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us which era or battlefield you want us to cover next, because this channel exists for serious history enthusiasts who care about the details that rarely make it into textbooks. What you're about to hear isn't pop history or recycled trivia. These are real survival methods taught to Allied and Axis soldiers alike, techniques considered so effective that many were classified or deliberately kept vague in post-war manuals. Stick with this guide to the end, because each of these tricks reveals how ordinary men survived extraordinary conditions, and how the same principles can still be applied today by anyone who studies survival seriously. How soldiers learned to use dirt and fabric to hide from both humans and machines. One of the most closely guarded survival practices of World War II involved improvised camouflage that defeated not only the human eye, but early detection equipment. Soldiers were taught never to rely on issued uniforms alone. In forests, hedgerows, and ruined cities, they rubbed dirt, ash, crushed leaves, and even engine grease into fabric to break up colour and texture. This wasn't about blending in perfectly, but about disrupting outlines. A human eye is trained to recognize shapes, not colours, and World War II instructors drilled this relentlessly. A helmet rim left clean could get you killed faster than a bright insignia. Today, this lesson applies directly to wilderness survival and tactical concealment. If you're hiding in plain sight, whether from animals or people, breaking recognizable shapes with natural textures remains far more effective than expensive camouflage gear. Why controlled dehydration was taught instead of constant water consumption. Contrary to modern survival myths, World War II soldiers were trained to ration water intelligently, not sip constantly. Desert units in North Africa learned that frequent small drinks could increase thirst and accelerate dehydration. Medical officers taught controlled intake combined with reduced movement and shaded rest periods. Soldiers were instructed to wet cloths and wrap them around the neck or head instead of drinking precious water. In modern survival situations, this principle still matters. When water is scarce, managing exertion and cooling the body externally can preserve hydration longer than panic drinking. World War II manuals emphasized discipline over instinct, and that mindset saved lives in deserts, jungles, and sieges. How improvised food sourcing kept isolated units alive for weeks. Behind enemy lines, food supply collapse was common, and soldiers were trained to recognize edible plants, insects and animals native to their deployment zone. British and German troops alike carried regional survival guides with illustrations of safe roots, berries and leaves. They were also trained to snare small animals silently using wire, bootlaces or parachute cord. Cooking fires were minimized by using trench stoves dug into the ground, reducing smoke and light. For modern survivalists, this shows the value of regional knowledge. Learning what grows where you live and how to prepare it safely is more useful than any generic survival kit. Why, you might ask, did silence discipline become a matter of life and death? Well, silence wasn't just about avoiding detection. It was also about conserving energy and, honestly, maintaining psychological control. Soldiers were trained to move, eat, and even communicate without making any unnecessary sound. Equipment was carefully wrapped in cloth to stop metal clatter, and boots were modified with fabric or rope to soften footsteps. In forests and ruins, just a single accidental noise could unfortunately reveal an entire unit. This discipline, by the way, translates directly to modern scenarios such as wildlife observation, evasion training, or disaster response, where noise can attract danger. What to see? Survival doctrine understood quite clearly that awareness begins with controlling what you project into the environment. During the Second World War, soldiers learned to use the landscape itself as protection, rather than relying solely on equipment. One of the most powerful survival lessons from that era was the idea of terrain as armor. Infantry were trained to read the ground's contours almost instinctively, understanding where bullets might travel, and crucially, where they would not. Even a shallow depression, a tree root or a shell crater could offer far more protection than simply lying flat on open ground. Soldiers learned to approach ridgelines at angles, never allowing themselves to be silhouetted against the sky. You know, in modern survival and outdoor navigation, this knowledge still holds true. Understanding terrain can shield you from weather, animals, and even human threats, all without the need for any specialized tools. Now, let's talk about why mental routines were considered essential survival tools. World War II training recognized that panic could kill faster than hunger or cold ever could. Soldiers were taught specific mental routines to help them maintain focus during periods of isolation, bombardment, or captivity. Things like counting steps, reciting memorized texts, or following strict daily schedules, these preserved mental clarity when it was needed most. In fact, prisoners of war who kept up their routines tended to have higher survival rates, something confirmed by post-war studies. For today's survivalists, this really reinforces the idea that psychological resilience is a skill you can train. In emergencies, a bit of structure keeps your decision-making intact when chaos threatens to take over. Emergency medical improvisation became standard knowledge out of sheer necessity. With medics often unavailable, soldiers were trained to improvise first aid on the spot. Clothing could be turned into bandages, belts could serve as tourniquets, and rifle parts or branches made for excellent splints. Soldiers learned to clean wounds with boiled water or alcohol substitutes to stave off infection. These skills weren't optional, they were expected. Even today, this mindset is absolutely invaluable. Knowing how to adapt with whatever you have on hand can mean the difference between recovery and disaster in remote environments or emergencies. World War II survival training was, well, brutal, practical, and always rooted in reality. These techniques weren't taught to impress anyone. They existed to ensure survival under some of the worst conditions humanity has ever faced. They remain relevant because, honestly, human biology and psychology haven't changed, and neither has the environment's tendency to turn hostile without warning. If this guide added real value to your understanding of history and survival, do subscribe to After the Sirens, share this with someone who takes history seriously, and comment below with the next hidden chapter of wartime survival you'd like to see uncovered.